Greenstone is a carbon solution specialist organisation. So our primary focus is to allow clients to be able to account for their carbon accurately using our enterprise accounting platform, and then to be able to analyse that data effectively, and then to be able to generate strategies to be able to reduce carbon across the corporation, and then to monitor their progress. So our primary focus is around those four areas. And then we have a consulting team that help our clients then come up with strategies, determine strategies, and reduce carbon across the company. We're announcing the addition of a green IT module to our enterprise carbon accounting platform. The reason why we brought this out was more and more of our clients are now under pressure to look at their carbon emissions from IT. Now, IT currently represents around about 2% of carbon emissions globally, or more importantly, it's the equivalent of the carbon emissions from aviation. So there's a lot of focus around how do you reduce the carbon emissions from IT. The module will allow you to measure all your IT estate within the organization, your data centers, and also look at the associated services. For instance, if you have an IT company providing a whole bunch of services around your IT, what's the carbon associated with that? So you're able to measure all of those aspects of it. In essence, what you'll end up with is a carbon emissions profile of your entire IT portfolio. Each country has different grid factors. So our application allows you to calculate carbon using those standards set by the GHG on a country-by-country basis. So that gives you sort of a global organization footprint. Now, the interesting thing about standards in measuring carbon is that there are different standards in different countries, and that makes carbon accounting very complex and difficult. So in the UK, for instance, although we have GHG globally, we also have a DEFRA standard set out by DEFRA as an organization. So that takes into account more variables than GHG for calculating carbon. So if you do calculation of carbon using GHG, you get a different figure to the one that you calculate using DEFRA. Now, for the legislation in the UK, DEFRA will be publishing a specific standard under CRC for doing that. So now you can start to imagine globally, you're now going to get different countries publishing different standards. In France, there's a different standard called Bilan Carbone, which takes into account various different standards, again, to calculate carbon. So this is when you move away from clients trying to measure their own carbon internally using spreadsheets into an enterprise accounting platform like ours, because all of that pain associated with measuring that and the accuracy associated with measuring using these different standards move into software. So that's a key issue that we resolve by having an application like ours. The first one is, where do you get the data from? So data collection, data gathering is a key challenge in measuring carbon. And that comes from the fact that data around carbon emissions is disparate. So you have travel systems that have data in there that you need to collect. If you're measuring IT, you have IT estate management systems, asset management systems. You have databases that have employee details. You have ERP systems that have energy information, or energy management systems, or building management systems. All these systems hold disparate data. Now, getting all of that together to be able to get an accurate picture of your carbon is quite a laborious process for a client. And what we do with the application is we integrate into those solutions to be able to make that an automated process where appropriate. In some instances, clients don't want to do that. We can use spreadsheet downloads and a whole range of. So we offer a client a range of solutions that are aimed at making the whole process of data gathering as least painful as possible. At the same time, ensuring that the data that we're gathering is accurate, so that the picture that they get at the end of this is compliant with legislation. So it becomes very important that the data that's being gathered is accurate, therefore, because you are legislated against and you have to report to the government on what you're capturing. The second thing really is about being able to generate a whole range of analysis around the data that you've got. So once you've got the data, what do you do with it? How do you go about generating carbon reduction strategies? How do you go about understanding what your portfolio of carbon is? as a company. So we provide a whole range of functionality for you to be able to sort of cut that data around in different ways, compare different organizations that are emitting carbon, look at the worst offenders, least offenders, and so on, and start to generate strategies where appropriate for your organization. So then you end up with a cost-benefit analysis that says I can build a strategy now for the next 3 to 5 years around my carbon reduction. One of the key other issues they've got is correlating carbon reduction to cost reduction. Because one of the key focus that every one of our clients has right now is about, okay, carbon reduction is an important thing. When we get legislated, I want to make sure that we do it. But actually, I want to prove that carbon reduction is the same as cost reduction. Because reducing your carbon effectively means that you're reducing consumption of raw materials, or you're reducing consumption of energy, reducing consumption of travel, fuel. So what we tend to do with the application is to correlate all the financial benefits and costs back into the stakeholders to say, look, if I reduce carbon by this much, I've also made us much more efficient and delivered value for money back into the organization. So those are some of the key challenges from a business point of view. From a technology point of view, it's about being able to account for carbon in a legislative framework on a country-by-country basis. So each country may arrive at a different way of calculating carbon based on their local legislation. Even though there's a GHG standard to calculate carbon on a global basis, and a lot of applications only focus on that, on a global calculation methodology, each country is coming up with its own methodology for reporting against. So in the UK, the carbon reduction commitment and DEFRA will result in sort of 2 or 3 calculations that you have that may be appropriate for the UK. In France, there's Bilan Carbon, which is a different calculation for reporting locally in France. So as a global company, you may be measuring your carbon using GHG to compare apples with apples, but your legislative requirement may be that you report against local standards. Greenstone can help in 2 or 3 ways for an organization, really. Our primary objective is to allow clients to measure their carbon in a more accurate and auditable fashion. So when it comes to legislative compliance, we're the ideal product for you to be able to start to utilize to make sure that your company is meeting its compliance and legislative requirements. It also helps in the overall carbon reduction scheme of an organization. So we're not just about meeting your legislative requirement, we're also here to be able to help your overall carbon reduction agenda. So the legislation focused on energy consumption. What we measure in the software is your entire carbon portfolio as a company. So mature organizations that are dealing with climate change and carbon reduction will need to use a product like this to look at their overall portfolio and how can they start to reduce it. And as globally, if the US starts to create its own cap and trade system, and as Australia is coming into some schemes now, and France is looking to implement some taxation, if you're a global organization, you really need to start to account for this at this level. So you need to be able to report at a national level of all your liabilities, and you need to understand at a global level where your carbon emissions are and where your liabilities are across the world. So there's different layers in which we can help organizations. In the UK, it's really now trying to help organizations get in shape for the legislative compliance that they've got to do.